Well, thank you for joining us here tonight at the exhibit opening of Rightfully Yours, KU Campus and Community Scholars Consider U.S. Voting Rights. We are honored today to showcase the scholarship and creative works from students, faculty, and staff across campus and throughout our community. For this exhibition, the library is partnered with Haskell University, the League of Women Voters of Kansas, the NAACP of Kansas, and the ACLU of Kansas, of KU, excuse me. Thank you to each of these essential allies, and especially thanks again to the League of Women Voters for setting up the voter registration table here tonight.
Oh, yeah, bravo.
Yes, indeed, bravo. Rightfully Yours is an especially exciting exhibit to feature this year as we look ahead to an upcoming presidential election. Bringing the idea of voting rights to the attention of campus and our community is more important than ever. Indeed, 2020 is a particularly auspicious year to reflect on the progress of voting rights and the democratic process. This is the 150th anniversary of the 15th Amendment to the United States Constitution, which assures the legal right to vote for African Americans. It is the centenary of the 19th Amendment, which extended legal suffrage to women. And it is the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which attempted to remove obstacles to suffrage that had been enacted by the states. And I think it's an important reminder that this struggle is not over. Equal access for all Americans to the democratic process is still a contested issue, and programs like this evening's help to advance that struggle. I'd also like to take a moment to recognize several individuals who contributed this evening. First, I want to thank all of our KU Libraries faculty and staff for their support of this exhibit. We're especially grateful to Sarah Goodwin-Thiel and the Harricombe Gallery Exhibits Advisory Board, Samantha Bishop-Simmons, El Maria Vila, and Megan Schwererman, for their hard work in curating this exhibit. We would also like to extend thanks to Terry Finneman, who coordinated the campus-wide 19th Amendment Centenary celebration. And finally, to our Office of Communications and Advancement for their support. Several items in the exhibit were contributed specifically by undergraduate students. Each of the hanging frames that you see was designed from undergraduate students by students of design professor Patrick Dooley. And in one case, you'll see a project on suffragettes by undergraduates in the School of Journalism. Please be sure to look for their amazing work. We're privileged to have some of those contributors to this exhibit in the audience tonight, so please join me in thanking them. We are fortunate to be surrounded by scholars who add to this topic, and we are honored to recognize them as we celebrate the centenary of the 19th Amendment. Today we are also pleased and honored to have Kansas State Representative Barbara Ballard with us as our panel moderator. We'll get several chances to clap for Representative Ballard, but for the moment, please join me in welcoming Interim Provost Carl Leshway, who will introduce Dr. Ballard to you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm incredibly excited to be here with you tonight for this exhibit opening of Rightfully Yours. This exhibit, showcasing scholarship from KU students, faculty, and staff, is especially timely as we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment. An amendment which gave millions of Americans, primarily white women, the right to vote. Through this exhibit, the KU libraries have done a wonderful job of highlighting voting rights and challenges over the past century. Thank you to each of the scholars who've contributed to the intellectual and enriching environment that comes from this exhibit. I also want to take a second to also talk about what this means in terms of highlighting what KU is as a university. As a research university, sometimes we will talk about the importance of the research we do, and we will also talk about the importance of student success and the teaching environment and the pedagogical experiences that we provide to students. I am convinced that one of the things that makes KU special is that research not just sits next to the student experience. This is a great example of how research enhances the student experience, how research allows us to push ourselves in ways we've not thought about before, to give voice to folks who have not had that voice, to allow students to have a hands-on opportunity that will provide them with career readiness skills and make them better people, while also standing side by side with some of the most brilliant faculty and staff researchers and graduate student researchers we have anywhere in the country. That is a really special part of this university, and I am thrilled to be here at this exhibit, which provides a showcase of that. Now, I did say before that this is an especially timely exhibit, and as you know, we are at many crossroads in our country right now. And when you're up against those sort of things, you need courageous people. You need people who effortlessly combine passion, a willingness to push hard for what's right, and humanity. And I can't think of anyone who's affiliated with this university who has that collection of characteristics and serves as such a role model for all of us. Barbara Ballard, I'm here and excited to introduce her. She's our state representative. She's the Senior Associate Director at the Dole Institute of Politics, and she's served numerous roles at the university. Director of the Emily Taylor Center, Associate Dean for Student Life, and Associate Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs. She also has an affiliate faculty appointment with the Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. And this is also another great example of what's really nice of being at a research university where we have incredible people like Representative Ballard, who is part of our research, part of our instruction for students, and part of our development of our students. Now, she was elected to the Kansas House in 1992. She currently serves on the House leadership team as the Democratic Caucus Chair. And in 2017, she was re-elected to the Executive Committee of the National Conference of State Legislatures. Tonight, we are pleased to have Dr. Barbara Ballard with us to moderate an engaging panel discussion on voting rights. Please join me in welcoming her.
Good evening, and I'm delighted to be with you. And I think we all know when we say rightfully yours, some people don't believe that. It's not rightfully yours. It may be mine, but not yours. And tonight we're going to talk a lot about why is it rightfully yours in many ways. The 19th Amendment, I'll just start with that. It took over 70 years, 70. And when you talk with our young students on campus, they have no idea because they've always had the right to vote. But 70 years, and there were women fighting and fighting and fighting. And if you know the story about Tennessee, which was the pivotal state, they wore yellow roses. And that would say you were for it, and if you didn't, that would be the other issue. But you think, now, why did that person finally decide, that young man decide he was going to vote for it? As the story goes, and they have printed it, so there must be a little truth to it, that his mother said, be a good boy. Be a good boy. This is something I want. This is something women want. This is something women have earned, that women have worked over 70 years for. And he did. You do what mama says. But there's a lot of conflict for him. Well, that says for me, life's not always easy. And you make decisions that are not always popular. And people will always talk about you. But my grandmother said, if they're not talking about you, you're not doing anything. So we're going to start a little bit from there. But I wanted you to start with, think of 70 years. Women have patience. They will continue to have patience. When things are not working, we don't give up. People who believe in things don't give up. That's not to say men don't give up. It just says women have had to fight longer and harder. And we stick together if we really want something. Your panel this evening. Raise your hand. Some people know you, some people don't. Amy Castle. Adjunct faculty, School of Business and School of Law, and ACLU KU faculty advisor. Carol Cadu Blackwood, brand new school board member, USD 497. Lois Orth Lopes, NAACP political action member and education committee chair. And Syl King, co-president, League of Women Voters of Kansas. I will ask each to tell you a little about themselves. They have 2 minutes, so it can't be too long. About themselves and what you consider your top mission. If we're talking about voting and getting everyone involved. And I'll start with Syl.
Thank you.
I don't know, are you on?
Thank you. I can hear myself even. I'm a native Kansan. I grew up in Whitewater, Kansas, a town of 500 down in Butler County. And I followed my older sister and brothers to KU, so I've got 2 degrees from KU. I actually became active in the League of Women Voters in about 2011, I believe it was. It was right before the requirement to have photo ID when you go to the polls. So when the previous Secretary of State put through the act to require photo ID and proof of citizenship, I came in and was active in registering voters here in Lawrence, Douglas County, right as that was happening. So I was president of the league, co-president of the local league, and voter service chair, and then when I went on to the state level as a voter service person and co-president, I'm in my 3rd year as co-president of the Kansas League. And one of our top priorities is always voting. And when the requirement for proof of citizenship went into effect, and we saw how devastating it was that some of our local leagues were even advised, we can't handle these documents. We might as well not be registering people to vote, because if they don't have the document, they're not going to be registered. And so the concern was that we would be taking all these applications and nothing would happen with them because they didn't have the document. So in 2014, I did an analysis and took 250 people that the league here in Lawrence had registered. I looked them up. 97% of them we did actually get registered because we talked to them. Said, this is what you need. You need to turn in your birth certificate or your Native American ID card or your naturalization document. And this is where you turn it into. And you take a photo and and email it in. And this is also the dates when you have to vote, and this is how you find information on your candidates, and on and on and on. So 97% of them did actually, that we talked to, gave me information, did get registered. And of those, 81% actually turned up for that election in 2014 out of 250. But we know that 35,000 people didn't get registered, they were on suspense list. It's 12% of those who tried to register in the state. And so it's been a battle. We're glad that that's not currently an issue. But we don't know that it's not going to come back because it's in the 10th appellate court. I'll turn it over. I probably took more than 2 minutes.
So that's okay. Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Well, I'm Lois Orthlums, and first of all, because I know what's going on at the university, I will say that my pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I also want to recognize that I'm sitting up here as a white woman representing the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, but that is because our president, Ursula Minor, please raise your hand, thank you, has asked me to do this. I think it's because I've been active in NAACP for 6 years, but politically active for almost 40. And I would say that NAACP cannot endorse a candidate or work for candidates, but what we do is encourage voter registration, voter education, and then voter turnout. And as we look at those issues, we have a lot of people who, for many different reasons, don't feel that their vote matters, doesn't count, why bother? And so there are several things that we have to be working on. We also, so in our voter registration thing, we're trying to make sure that people who have not voted in the past recognize that it is an important thing to do. And I will just say in this last school board election, we had 3 women of color elected, and I know for a fact that there were people who voted for the first time because of that. So we need to keep them involved. So making sure that they see that it's important for them. Also, we have people who don't understand that if they change their address, they have to re-register to vote. And the poorer you are, the more likely it is that you're changing your address. And so people don't realize that. So that's part of our education and registration issues. Another thing is that there's a disproportionate number of people of color who are incarcerated. And in Kansas, someone who has been put in jail for, convicted, once they're off papers, parole is over, probation is over, once that is over, they have the right in Kansas to re-register to vote, and a lot of people don't know that. As far as educational issues go, we are working really hard to help people feel comfortable about the candidates and the races. And there are people who don't vote because they don't feel like they know what's going on, so we've had some forums and we're trying to continue in that effort. Also, there are people who are not comfortable with the process. So we have done things like helping people understand what the ballot might look like. It's kind of amazing how many people are afraid to go vote because they just don't know quite what's going on. So part of the education is just helping them be comfortable with the fact that this is what's on the ballot. These are your issues. If you don't feel comfortable in voting for everything, just vote for what you feel comfortable on. At least go out and do that. And also knowing that where their polling place is and that they have the right to vote. I'm sure Amy's going to talk more about rights, but then the other thing is getting them to actually turn out. And it's really a challenge when people have jobs that they can't get away from, have children, don't have transportation to get to the polling site. So one of the things that we will do is to help people understand that about advanced ballots, about voting by mail. And that takes a little education too, because just today, literally, I had a conversation with an African-American faculty member who grew up in Georgia, who just absolutely refuses to vote in any other way than to see that ballot go through the machine, because she absolutely doesn't trust. And if you know anything about what's going on in Georgia, you would understand why. So it's partly helping people understand. In Douglas County, we're very lucky. Jamie Shue, our county clerk, is really dedicated to getting everybody out to vote. I'm going to go fast here. I think maybe I've covered everything. And also trying to get people involved in the voting process in other ways. Jamie Shue is always being poll workers, and it's not that hard to do. And so I actually brought a sign along, which I'm going to put back there. I'm going to put it back on this table. But if a person is thinking that they might like to be a poll worker, it's not that hard, and they really need people. You just go to the Douglas County, Kansas, so it's douglascountyks.org, and you can work your way through the links and find information about voting and then how to become a poll worker. So there are lots of ways to get people involved in the election process and getting them talking to families and friends and so on. And I will stop right there.
Carol?
Let me see, I gotta test this out. Good evening, everyone. Thank you, League of Women Voters, for inviting me here tonight in the University of Kansas. I am a longtime Lawrence resident, and I would just like to add that I hear native Kansan all the time. I'm about as native Kansan as you can get. My tribe was put here in 1832, 29 years before Kansas became a state. But I have two degrees. I have a political science degree from the University of Kansas, and I hold a master's in social welfare from the university as well. So I just want to just piggyback off of Lois. I would like to use my position as a school board member to motivate young voters and remove barriers and educate our students on how they can get involved. Because I remember back when I was at Corbett Elementary, one of the motorists complained because I would hold signs up on 19th Street, right there on the one-way street. I would hold them up and say, vote for so-and-so, and I would feel so deflated if my candidate lost. But one day I was called into the office by the principal, and they said, Carol, we hate to tell you this, but you need to stop campaigning. And it broke my heart. But it's like your grandma said, if people aren't talking, you're not doing something right. But I cannot empathize. I cannot emphasize enough at how we need to get our young people to vote. Because when I was going door-to-door campaigning, people said, well, I've lived here X many years, and I've never voted. But since you knocked on my door, I'm going to vote for you. And that's the level of the voter apathy that we're seeing here in Douglas County. So we need to get our young people involved, because it's going to be the young people that can turn this election around. And I know I can ramble more, so I'm going to pass it on to Amy.
Hello. Hi. My name is Amy Castle. I am currently a professor here at KU. I teach business law at the business school. I teach 2 classes at the law school, and I also teach constitutional law in the political science department. I was an attorney for 20 years in downtown Kansas City before I came over to KU. Best gig ever. And but I also graduated. I did my undergrad here at KU. I graduated from the political science department and went to law school here. So I bleed crimson and blue, rock talk, Jayhawk, KU. So when I came over here to teach, it was in 2016, August 2016. So a pretty significant event happened around November 2016. And the next semester, because some students came to me a little distraught about what was going on in the world, I decided to form the ACLU of KU. Did not exist on campus before then. So since that time, ACLU of KU, I have to give a shout out to our president, Andrew Lee, who's in the audience. Raise your hand, Andrew. Actually, our 3rd president now. But we have a lot of issues we're passionate about. Voting rights is absolutely one of them. Voting rights and voting participation among students. So what we have done, and we're in our 3rd year, we've actually worked with the administration, formerly Reggie Robinson, who's now gone, but we've gotten KU to send out, for those of you who got emails, students who got emails before the last election, giving you the site to go to see if you're registered, providing voter registration forms, that was because of the ACLU of KU. So we have worked with the administration to make sure that all the students have easy access to voter registration. And so we've done that now for a couple of years. In addition to boots on the ground, I can't tell you how many hours Andrew has been out actually registering voters. We always have a voter registration table at all of our meetings. But one thing that I would like to see as far as voting is not just registration, but closing the gap between those who are registered and those who actually vote. And I think, you know, one of my big things, and one of the ACLUK's big things, is education about the fact that every time a barrier is put up, that usually affects poor people and people of color, right? So when you talk to people who aren't woke, and you say, okay, well, Kansas, you know, used to, before Judge Robinson, required a birth certificate to register to vote, and to some, like, yeah, right, of course, you gotta show that you're a citizen. But people don't understand, first of all, oftentimes those are barriers that are erected purposefully, but who does that affect, right? That affects people who actually can't afford to get a birth certificate. Sometimes, you know, the $30, $40, $50 is cost prohibitive. What if you were born in rural Kansas 75 years ago? You don't have a birth certificate, right? So every single barrier, voter ID, right? If you have people who live in urban areas who might be usually poor and people of color, they might not even need a driver's license to get by in life. But guess what? Now you're telling them they have to go and get an ID just to be able to vote. Well, sometimes that $10, $15, it's a barrier. It's kind of like a poll tax. Plus, they got to get to the place to get an ID. So one thing, Lois had mentioned, Jamie Shue in Douglas County, our elections clerk is awesome. So one thing Jamie Shue does, if you live in Douglas County and you need an ID to vote, he will come to your house and issue you a Douglas County ID, take your picture, and now you can vote. You can only use that ID for voting, right? But it's a government-issued ID for voting. So at ACLU, what actually our next meeting is on voting rights. You know, we try to, of course, we want to get students registered to vote. We want to get them to the polls, but also we need to recognize what these barriers actually, who they really impact, and the purposeful nature of some of those barriers.
All right,
I think we took longer than 2 minutes.
you did, but it was all right because you were headed in direction. What we're gonna talk about tonight, and I'm gonna go at lightning speed because we wanna leave time for you to have questions, would be increasing voter turnout in Kansas. We want it to be in every state, but we really have to take care of our own state in so many ways. So I'm going to just tell you something that you probably know, but voter turnout in Kansas. How Kansas compares nationally for voter turnout. Generally, voter turnout in the United States fluctuates significantly in national elections, with turnout being significantly higher during your presidential elections. It is the same, that's true in Kansas. Looking to the past 3 presidential elections, however, Kansas voter turnout is consistently in the bottom third of the states, okay? So, in the 2016 general presidential election, voter turnout was just 57.7%, coming in as 36th in the nation. This figure was below the national figure of 59.2, and dramatically below the 75th percent rate in states with the highest turnout. So in 2012, the general presidential election was 56.9 voting eligible students of Kansans cast a ballot. Now, this turnout ranked 37 among the 50 states in the District of Columbia and fell short of the national average of 58. In the 2008 general presidential election, an election with historically high turnout, 62% of Kansans' voting age population turned out to vote, which says when there's someone you want, you do turn out, rendering our state 31st in the nation. When taking the data from the last 3 general presidential elections into account and to the aggregate, Kansas has an average voter turnout of a little over 58%, ranking 35th of the 50 states. Now, this is something that's significant for us. When one turns to the midterm election statistics, however, we have a very interesting pattern. While voter turnout is usually lower across the board during midterm elections, Kansas voter turnout remains fairly consistent with the turnout matrix during the presidential elections. As a result, When looking solely at the midterm metrics, Kansas consistently ranks in the top 11 states. I was shocked when I read it. I read it again to make sure it was correct. So, in the most recent midterm elections in 2018, 57.4% of voting eligible Kansans turned out to vote, far exceedingly the nationwide average of 51%. While turnout for the 2014 midterm was dismally low, Kansas had the 7th highest turnout rate of 49.8%. Again in 2010 election, Kansas turnout fared much better than the national average. Looking at the data from the previous 3 midterm elections, Kansas' average voter turnout was nearly 8 percentage points higher than the national turnout. I'm going to stop there. The question is, and I'm going to ask the panel, why would you think Kansas midterm would be so much higher when presidential elections is higher?
I have a thought on that.
All right.
I think it's because there are many voters in Kansas, or one factor might be that there are so many voters in Kansas who feel that their vote doesn't really count in the presidential race because of the Electoral College. And they understand the importance of voting locally. One of the things I noticed in the school board municipal races is that, and this is something NAACP has been pushing, is to help people understand how important it is to vote for somebody who affects your daily life, the school board member, the city commissioner, and so forth. And I think Kansans are kind of catching on to that. There may be other things, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind. Okay?
Anyone else with thoughts? Yes, Phil?
Well, we do have our governor's election in the midterm, where not all states have the governors elected in the midterm. And we've had some very contested governor's races, which also helps on that. But I agree with Lois about the importance of the local.
What would you say, Carol?
Well, I agree with Lois, because when I was going door to door, I would convince people, well, people would say, well, I don't want to vote because I don't have children, or I don't want to vote because I haven't lived here that long. So I would convince them how local elections matter, and they affect the small systemic change that I would compare it to that in social work, we call it the direct systems change, where you throw a pebble in the water and it's a ripple effect, and you would see the light bulb come in their head like, oh my goodness, so yes, it will affect change down the road. So and it's the whole upstream theory of go upstream to solve the bigger problems.
I have no idea what the answer is. I'm hoping you have some
No, there is really no answer. They're just giving the statistics, and this was some law students researched it, wrote the paper, and I read it over, and I thought it's challenging to think, why would we be high? Not just high, well, we are really high on the midterm along those lines, okay? So if we look at all the things that are available to them, how effective do you think absentee voting is? Absentee voting. Well, absentee or an early advance. Before it was, I'm gonna back up. Before you had, if you did absentee, you had to have an excuse. You had to say you were sick, you couldn't come, you're whatever, and you could. But now with advance voting, you don't have to give an excuse whatsoever. You can request your ballot, and you can do it, ahead of time and everything else. How effective is that, and why would a large population not take advantage of it?
Well, I think it is really helpful and effective, and we've heard from our Douglas County clerk that the higher the early voting is, probably the higher the total turnout is. It's not that just every people vote early and don't come to the election day. It actually is a motivator when people can vote early. And again, in our busy lives, if you don't know for sure if you're going to be in town on election day, or if you know you're going to be working from 7 in the morning till 7 at night, it's really critical to have those options of going in to vote early or asking for a mail ballot, and it definitely does help our turnout.
I would like to dovetail on that, and I wish, I think we all wish, that, so if you want to vote by mail, advance ballot, you have to ask every election, specifically you have to ask to be able to do that, and I would love to see if you ask the first time to vote by advance ballot by mail, that's sort of the default, right? Because studies show it really does increase voter participation. and especially, you can tell students, like, you can vote and your jammies watching Netflix. That's a pretty cool deal. So I think that would be something that we would basically, we would love to see is not having to request advance ballots by mail every single election time.
All right, now that creates another problem, what you just brought up. Because there are many states that have permanent absentee voting. You sign up for it, and they have you down, and they just automatically send it to you. But not all states are doing it because they're afraid of fraud. But if you look at part of it, permanent voting, states with this option permit voters to join a permanent absentee voting list. The election administrators then send absentee ballot to voters on the permanent list without requiring the voter to reapply every election. Now, we should be interested, but a lot of people, the date comes and goes and they don't really know that. But permanently, we have 6 states, Arizona, California, District of Columbia, Hawaii, Montana, New Jersey, and Utah, as well as DC, have structures in place allowing the permanent absentee voting. That's something that eventually we may want to do that as well, okay? So, if I would ask you, what do you think is the biggest motivator to get 18 to 24-year-olds to the polls? I ask that question because we're part of the National Campaign of Political and Civic Engagement at Harvard. And the Dole Institute has been since 2003. And I was the representative, and I'm still the representative. Interesting thing about the National Campaign of Political and Civic Engagement, that program was started by Dan Glickman. And for those of you who know, Dan Glickman was the former congressman from Wichita, Democrat. And when he was no longer elected to Congress, Harvard has an interesting thing. They get a director every 2 years, every 3 years, 4 years, but they don't stay there permanently. And Dan Glickman was the director of the Harvard Institute of Politics. And he initiated in 2003 the National Campaign for Political and Civic Engagement. And University of Kansas was one of the 8 charter schools. In fact, tomorrow I am taking 3 students to Harvard because they're meeting again on civic engagement. And part of that was to increase the voting age of 18 to 24-year-olds. And then we have another category of 18 to 34 because they found out you have to go a little bit more because people are staying in graduate school longer or they're just not, they're very transit. So our big goal is to look at civic engagement, yes, then voter registration, then get out the vote. And why should young people vote? They don't want to hear about Social Security. They don't want to hear about their health care right now. They're going to be healthy forever, so they don't really care. And so they look at it, but they want to know, what are you going to do for me that's relevant to my time in life right now? So how can we get 18 to 24-year-olds interested?
Well, I have a thought. One of the things that I'll just jump right in, the League of Women Voters, and now NAACP is helping with this too, is to register students to vote in high school. But then you have to make sure that when they graduate from high school that they recognize that if they move away to go to college, that they, and they have to make a decision about whether they're going to still vote in their hometown or vote wherever they have moved and make a decision about either getting an advance ballot or changing their address and voting somewhere else. But I think that, frankly, there are so many things happening with younger people. I don't know about the 30-some-year-olds, but for students who live now with gun violence and all of the drills for safety in their schools, there are some issues that are so real to them that I personally see high school age and into their early 20s, people being much more interested in voting than the previous generation. And I think it's because there's so many issues that are so real to them right now that they're fighting for. And they believe that they have, I'm going to just say this, I think that the Parkland students and Greta and all of these younger people who are making national and international news by their outspoken behavior are making a difference in convincing people that they can make changes. So I think it's respecting them and frankly, people like me following them.
And I do believe that it comes down to the candidates themselves tailoring their platforms to the younger people, just like Lois said, the gun safety, the LGBT, reaching out to those, the LGBTQ2S+I communities. And there's the hot button issue of legalizing marijuana, because they have to tailor the platforms to get these young people to vote.
And also, I think, to your direct question, how do you incite these young folks to vote? Well, I've literally heard representatives tell me, well, I don't vote as a representative for issues like student debt and housing and loans, because like those aren't constituents of mine, right? I don't have to please them. So it's this chicken or the egg thing. We have to get young folks to vote so that politicians will listen to them and then vote, in their interest. So it's sort of an education thing. It's like, well, no wonder no one's listening to you because they don't have to, because they're not counting on your vote. So that's sort of what we need to switch on. And I think gun safety, environment, that is definitely tapping into the younger folks. But students, let's talk about, have representatives get up and talk about affordable housing in Lawrence, right? Or how, student debt, things that matter to 18 to 24-year-olds or 18 to 34-year-olds. But nobody's going to listen to them if they're not voting, because those politicians they know who's voting, right?
And one of the reasons why they may not be voting, and according to them, and I'm looking at 3 other things that I have heard from them at these conferences at Harvard. Number one, no one really asked me to get involved in it. And you would say, well, what about your mom and dad? Well, they don't vote either. So a lot of times it's what they see at home, who's voting, why they're voting, is there a conversation going on that would get them involved in it. In 1992, when I was on the school board, Lawrence Public Schools was a pilot program for kids voting. And part of kids voting was you would start with like your 2nd grade, 4th grade, and then would have legislators come in and they would talk about voting and they would meet people and all of this. And they would go to the polls with their parents or a guardian or whoever their aunt was taking them or whatever. And they had a separate area that they could vote. Well, Lawrence High and Free State still do it in Lawrence. But a lot of the other districts are not doing kids voting. But the high school kids are working with them. And the teachers are talking about people coming into class. They have brochures. They're showing them things. They're in the paper. I don't know if you noticed, but Join the World even reports what kids voting tallies are, their numbers. So you get to see. And after a while, when you're running for office, if you're, running like I am, you look to see what were those kids saying, what they're saying, because they're over here. But they were involved. They went to the polls, they tallied, and they showed them. And what they found out from 92 to the time they were 18, that was an increase in Kansas in that young vote. Because they had been doing it in their elementary classes and all the way through high school, and they had high school students also helping them. And they seemed to continue on that a little bit more because they got used to voting. Not only were the students voting, but they would go home and say, you got to take me there to vote. So then their parents were then registering to vote because they had to take their own children to the polls. So there were things we had in place. But kids voting is not as prominent as it used to be now because it's not national. And for those of you who may know, Diana Carlin was involved in it. Judge Perrin is still involved in it in Kansas because that's one way to get them early. Because once they're young, they want to continue voting in that capacity. So I just wanted to toss it up. They said, number one, if you want me to be involved, ask me to be involved either in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or the Independent, or ask me to get involved with your campaign. Let me see what's going on. And that way it's more relevant to me. But if no one's asking, if you ask, students will do it. But they want to be asked, and then they want it to be relevant. Ask me what I think about this issue. Ask me what would I do in that situation? I have an intern this year, and she was my intern last year. She asked me, could she come back this year? Well, this is the second year, so I don't have to go through all the stuff I did the year before. So now I said, choose a committee you want to go, follow it. You like the issue? Go testify, doing that committee, and do something relevant because you are interested and you want. A young person, 18, 19, and 20-year-old can think. They know what they want. We don't just want their vote. We want them to be invested in what's happening in this state. Okay. My last question to you, and we'll open it up to them. If you had a magic wand and you could change one thing about the political arena, I think she wants to change more than one. But if you could change one thing, and money was not an object, what would you want to change? Your hand was up first.
Yes, actually, I raised my hand too soon. I thought it was gonna be more specific to voting, waving a magic
Well,
wand.
it can be, it can be.
Yeah, I would love to see same-day voter registration. I would love to see if somebody who walks in can register the same day that they vote. Yeah, we gotta make sure it's all good, but same-day voter registration, I think, because the voter registration dates, like you said, Representative Ballard, like just goes over people's heads. So that would be my magic wand, is same-day voter registration.
The one thing in addition to same-day voter registration, which is currently in Senate Bill 351, which you can ask your senator to vote for, would be the National Presidential Voter Compact. That's not the name for it. But it would allow one person, one vote for the presidential election, instead of knowing that if you're in the red state and you vote in blue, you're probably not going to be counted, and vice versa. If you're in a blue state voting red, your vote's not going to count. So if we could do the compact, I think there are 11 or 12 states already signed on to the compact. And what it does is when there's enough states representing at least 270 of the electoral votes, thank you, that it would go into effect. And so it would give every vote the same weight, because right now we know that there are votes that are counted have like 3 times or 4 times the weight of votes in other states. And I would like to see that happen.
Hold up just a minute. I found something here when you said that. While there is strong evidence that same day and election day registration is connected to increased voter turnout, the actual extent of the impact is difficult to establish. Hans Vesposa is a fellow at the Heritage Foundation, argues that a lack of registration is not the reason people do not vote. Rather, he says the vast majority said they did not vote for reasons ranging from forgetting to vote to not liking the candidate, or the campaign issues, or simply they're just not interested. This means that an increase in voter registration would not actually impact the turnout, though there's nothing to support it would or would not. There is some support for this sentiment in scholarly, when they look at it. But further, a study says that election day registration had no recognizable impact on voter turnout in Maine since its implementation in 1973. So it might be some states would be more effective than others. But that does not mean we should not try it. It's just that it gives those that want to say fraud occurs their biggest thing of saying,
Yeah.
they were supposed to, along those lines, okay?
So,
Your comment.
okay, you said magic, right?
Yes.
Magic-wise, I have 2 things. One of them, if I really could wave a magic wand, I would wish that the voting population would have an understanding that no candidate is perfect. and that unfortunately, so many people don't vote because especially in a presidential race, they don't like either candidate, without understanding that no one is going to agree with you on every single issue, and that you need to still exercise your voting right and vote for the person who you think will do the best, not everything you want. So that's my magic, that people would have that understanding. But on a more practical thing, we're so lucky in Douglas County to have Jamie Shue. We have a much longer period of time in which we can cast advance ballots, and he is so good about getting information out to people, reminding them of things, letting us know what we have to do to get a mail-in ballot. That's not the case in every county. And I think it would be good if across the state there was a consistent period of time for advance voting and a consistent pattern in which voters get information about their voting sites, what they have to do if they want a mail ballot, and all those sorts of things. Right now, it's very inconsistent. We're just lucky in Douglas County.
And it's very easy to register to vote. You can go online to do it. I mean, we do it on campus all the time. Every year I have civic engagement, and we have all these different sites there. I mean, and we timed it. Less than 5 minutes, they can fill out that form, sign their name, and they're ready to go. The nice thing, since we're talking about Jamie Shue, I hope you will appreciate how good he is. He was the chair of all of the county clerks in the state, because that's how much respect they have for him. But one of the things that he will do, when we register students on campus, not out of state, because we can't register out of state, but when we register them in the 105 counties, you turn them into him, and he sees that his staff sends them out to the counties all around the state of Kansas. Not all counties will then do that for us, but he does it for everyone else in this county, and so it is. Go ahead.
Well, if I could I would like to echo what everybody said, but I'm just going to say what hasn't been said. There's a lot of misinformation with the youth. The youth don't understand it. Well, I've talked to young people, and they say, well, I don't want to register to vote because I don't want jury duty. There's that false notion. They don't want to do jury duty, and I say that no, that is false. So there's a lot of misinformation. There's that whole government participation or not wanting to get involved. And I just want to echo what everybody said, but I cannot stress enough. My daughters and their friends, well, my daughters are lobbyists. One of them lobbied 3 times, so I'm kind of biased. But their friends all said, well, I don't want to be selected for jury duty.
And the other reason we get all the time is, why should I vote? Look at those people, they're fighting all the time. And they're not doing anything. They're just fighting. Or this is happening, oh, they're so polarized, And if you look at it, and in a way I can understand that. Because over here you'll say, you see that candidate right there? All the black people are gonna vote for that candidate because black people, that's what they do. Or the Democrats, and it's gonna go over here. No, this right here is on the conservative one, so they gotta be real conservative, and they're over here. And no one sees anybody anymore coming together to get it done. And being in the legislature, and I have said it before and I'll say it publicly, it doesn't matter if the issue you're talking about is right or wrong, good or bad, negative or positive, it comes down to the numbers. If you have 63 in the House, it will pass. If you have, 21 in the Senate, it will pass. And if it's 2/3, it's 84 in the House or 24 in the Senate. So if you have the numbers, you'll get what you want. If you don't have the numbers, you're going to lose. So grow your numbers. If you want more, you have to bring in more in your numbers. But you have to do it in such a way that when people are looking at you, they can see that at least you're cordial. You may be firm with what you think, but it can't always be negative and put down and not trying to build some kind of consensus across the board or negotiate. And what the students have said, and they did to my class I taught last semester, that if they would just try to get along, then maybe young people would think, I want to do something like that. Question time from you. Anyone have questions? How much time we have? 5 minutes, 10 minutes, no minutes?
I'm not the timekeeper, I'm going to get the microphone.
Okay. Questions you might have?
It's not working.
You know what, there's a little thing, if we were having a rally, we would say, what does diversity look like? And I would say diversity is us right up here. This is what diversity looks like, because we're very diverse. Yes.
Several summers and falls,
I think it's turned off. Sorry.
several summers and falls, I worked going door to door for registering voters and get out the vote. Several people told me they couldn't vote, and finally several others explained that it would cost them $1,000 to get their rights restored. Does it really cost that much to get a hearing for a judge, or they have to pay as part of that legal fees?
You mean because of their felons?
Yeah, they're through with their prison time, they're through with their parole, and, well, they have kids, they don't have $1,000 or they, whatever, but is it really?
Amy, is that true?
Is there any,
I don't
is there,
think there's any, there's, once a person
really
who's been
that
convicted of
hard?
felony in the state of Kansas, once they finish everything, their incarceration time and whatever, probation time they have, then they should be eligible to vote. But I think the problem, one of the problems, so for many years, I actually worked at the federal courthouse in Kansas City in my former life as a lawyer, and I remember many times, and I was not woke then, so I remember my judge, when he was sentencing people, he would tell these people, you realize you're gonna lose your right to vote. So back then, I was just like, oh yeah, that sounds like it should be a good thing. But the problem is, what I don't think these judges are telling these people when they're being sentenced, and when they plead, right, that you can have your right to vote back once you finish your sentence. They're not being told that. And so that's the problem. I don't think that there is an actual financial, legal thing that you have to do once you finish your sentence, except register to vote, right? So that might be misinformation. But the problem is a lot of these folks who are getting out of incarceration and fulfilling their probation, they don't have any idea. In fact, they think they have been told that they can never vote again. And in some states, you can't ever vote again if you've been convicted of a felony.
But they do have to re-register.
They have to re-register, yeah.
Wait for the mic.
This really is a microphone, as you can tell. And we can even throw it, but I'm not going to throw it at you.
Is there a difference then between having your record expunged and having the right to vote though? Because I think that's where maybe
You do not have to get your record
differences.
expunged to vote.
And I think that may be where that,
That might be the misinformation. Somebody might have heard that they need to expunge their record before they can vote. That's not.
Then they have to pay for legal fee and everything else in order to do it.
They just have to be off papers. No more probation or parole.
In fact, when you said you have to re-register, the other thing, remember, if you move anywhere in Lawrence from one place to another, you have to go in and re-register too. If you move from apartment 4, but you're still at 304, and you go to apartment 2, you have to go back and let them know too, because they can't find you if they don't know exactly where it is. So a lot of people think, well, I've been registered. No, you have to register night only.
But it's really easy, ksvotes.org. ksvotes.org to change your address.
In one of the last elections, I believe there was a town in western Kansas that only had one voting site and it had been moved outside of the
That's Dodge City.
Dodge City. Has that situation been improved?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that is. And actually, we have to talk about it, and okay, so MSNBC, we know that. Rachel Maddow sent her crew out there to look at it because they said there was construction and you couldn't get to it and everything, and her crew came from New York and they took pictures of it and nothing was being blocked.
Representative Ballard,
Yes.
couple of thoughts. One, in your numbers, 63 and 21.
Yeah.
You also have to have the 1. If you don't have a governor to sign the bill, you won't get the law. So it's 63, 21, and 1.
Well, that's true, but the governor can't vote.
I understand. Now,
All right, so
I
I'm keeping it honest. There's 165, you got 40 in the Senate, 125 there, they vote. But now the governor is another issue.
I was going to suggest the reason we have midterm higher voting is because that's when the Kansas Senate is up. being a House member, you run every 2 years, you forget about those guys across the hall, but the Senate is up as
I
well.
don't forget about them, they're fortunate, they run there before.
Yeah, and so they're up in the off year. All statewide offices are up in the off year. So you've got the governor as well as the attorney general, et cetera. And that is local politics, I think, has more of an effect relative to boosting our numbers than a presidential election. And then those of us in Topeka, I think if I register at the UPS store, I don't have to re-register for that.
All right. Thank you for the comment.
While you're running the microphone, I just wanted to follow up on the Dodge City lawsuit. So actually the ACLU of Kansas, on which I actually serve as a board member, they filed a lawsuit, and the lead plaintiff in that lawsuit, Alejandro Rangel Lopez, is a freshman here at KU. So, yeah.
And he's still active.
Oh, yeah.
Other questions?
Yes, my question has to do with the fact that we're about to do another decennial census and how that impacts voting.
Oh,
I'm so glad you said that, because I
Yes.
was going to say something about it and forgot. The census is coming out sometime between March 12th and the 20th, I believe. We will receive something in the mail that tells us it's time to do the census. And if we don't get online and respond right away, eventually we'll get a postcard that reminds us to do it, and then eventually down the line, someone will come knocking on our door. But I think it's really critical that people understand that it really makes a difference in how we're districted for Congress as well as for the Kansas legislature. So it's really important that we be counted, but also because of the services we get. If we don't count all the people who live in a particular area, then they don't have the numbers that are required to get a particular service.
There's one other point I'd want to make on the census, and that is when you get that first introductory card, you'll have a code number or a code on it that you go online and enter your census information. Here in Lawrence, where we have 50% of our housing units rentals, and many of them are not related rentals. I've got some myself. And so you've got one number to go in online and enter one time, and you've got to get your whole household. So for all those students who are living in apartments with other students, you need to get together and find out how to answer those 10 questions for each of you, and do it at one time with that one number. You enter the one number and only to yourself, and you left off your 7 roommates. Those 7 roommates are not counted unless you go back and try to correct it. So it's a very critical thing, I think, particularly in these.
raise your
large
hand if you
towns.
understand how the census works. Oh my goodness, not everybody knows how it works. Well, it's an interesting one, but the one thing when people say, I don't want to because they know too much about me and they may give my information to someone else and everything else, because that census asks everything. I mean, it's nosy. It has all kinds of things, and people are afraid of all of that information out there. But one of the things, we did it, and I looked at it because I needed to know. They cannot disclose any of that information for 72 years. 72 years, they can't. And anyone who goes around to personally visit with them and get the census has to take an oath that they will not disclose whatever they have. So, I mean, it's about as safe as we can get on it, but still people are afraid to get that information for the census, and it affects your hospital funding, your police, your fire, all the things that you have in town, because you don't. And this will be the first time that our students will be counted in Douglas County, because we were the only state that allowed students to be counted in their county where they have permanent residence. And we did that in the last election. That says now they will be where they are all the time. So if you look at all the students that were living here all the time, we were not getting anything from the census from that, but we had to provide police, fire, hospital services, and everything else. Okay, yes. go 5 more minutes. I think people are getting a little restless. Go ahead.
Speaking about the census, what kind of assurances of cybersecurity are they providing?
All right, the way I understand it is about as secure as it can be. And they're bragging about how safe it is.
And remember that the census count does determine all of our redistricting that's gonna happen in 2022. For congressional districts, Kansas representative districts, Kansas Senate districts, school board districts. So if you are not counted in your district where you live, you are shorting your representation overall for US and state elections.
It also matters on the 4 reservations in Kansas to get out there and get those numbers counted. Because the representation matters. It's very, very important that it's important to remember that the Native people self-report if they're Native American on the census, so they may not be enrolled in a tribe, but those numbers matter.
One more question, last one.
Is it
Oh, you want the mic?
Is it true that our Native American citizens have to have a special card in order to vote?
No, we just simply need a voter registration card, just like everybody else.
Okay, not a
But
driver's license or, yeah.
If you're on the reservation,
Oh,
it's difficult because some of our members don't have formal addresses.
Yes,
That's what you're speaking of. So yes, so they do have a higher chance of, what we saw in South Dakota, they were getting turned away at the polls because they didn't have that voter registration card because we don't, have formal addresses.
So how do we fix that?
You would go to your representative. I mean, it would take.
That's your federal.
As a federal issue.
Yeah, that's a federal issue. All right?
I just want to say real quickly before everyone goes, we'll be having a gallery lecture series, which is a lecture event, 45-minute lecture event in conjunction with this exhibition on February 27th. And the person who will be speaking is the KU Senate Body President, whose name is Tierra Floyd. And she was invited by the governor to be on a Kansas Census Committee. And she's going to be coming here talking about that committee, as well as the work she's doing on campus to get students involved. So if you can come, that's February 27th from 11 to 11:45. I encourage you to be here. We'll have another one on April 7th, but you can learn about that later on. That's someone talking about presidential rhetoric and the Trump campaign rallies. The first name is Jacob Justice. He's a PhD student here in Kansas, here on campus. But anyway, on the 27th of February, please come. That'll be really interesting to hear more about the census.
With that,
I would just ask that you help me thank our panelists and Representative Ballard.
and let me thank the panelists. And certainly I want to thank all of you for coming out. Because, there's other places you could have been, things you probably needed to do. But we do want to thank you very much for that. And I want to thank the Dean Smith for putting this on in the library. Is it Sarah? Yeah, and we communicated all along, and I want to thank her very much and Provost LeSueur at this time. But the most important thing that I hope you got from this tonight, that we have to increase the voter turnout. But we also have to get people excited about wanting to turn out. And you heard someone say, we may not have a perfect candidate, but I can use students as an example. If the students had not turned out for me over 20 years ago, I would not have won my election because I won it by 91 votes. And the students came to me and wanted to know if they could. It was the first time it's happened on our campus. The young Democrats and the college Republicans combined. And they worked together to help me get elected. That's because I was on this campus. They saw me do things with them. They knew how much I cared about that issue. If those students did it for me, they can do it for anyone who they know believe in them, will work hard for them, and will try and get it done. And It showed that Democrats and Republicans could work together. It may be a little bit harder now because we're so polarized. But voting is too crucial in this country. If it were not, and I have to remind lots of people, people died because they wanted to vote. People were denied those opportunities. And now it's so easy, and they will not fill out the little form and get there. Well, you know what? I think we owe the legacy of all those people that died, that wanted to make life better for all of us. And voting is only one of the ways that we can make our life better. But it is one that says my vote is as good as your vote. And my vote only counts one at a time, just like all the others. And if we could just get that point across to them, that working together you can get all kinds of things done. You don't have to really love somebody to work with them. You just have to try and agree enough to make life a little bit better for Kansans. And students play a very important role in doing that. Because once they start, they continue. And they will be, they're the future now, but they will be those people out there, your taxpayers, and making decisions. And it's nice of us to start training them now. So with that, I thank you all for being here, and give a big round of applause.